You might think DC's recent film slate lacks cohesion, but where some might see problems, I see opportunity. I think DC is actually in the perfect spot right now to bust out its multiverse theory and unite all of its properties under one gigantic umbrella. It's a radical idea, but ultimately it's for the best if DC movies want to continue operating separately from each other and not confuse audiences too much. If DC goes the full multiverse route, it could not only unite all the recent DC movies, but also bring older classics as well as the current Arrowverse into the fold. Isn't that exciting? Let's discuss. Is it just me, or do we have a lot of Batman hanging around? Let me take a look at my organizational chart I made for myself. Alright, so we have Robert Pattinson as the new, younger Batman in a separate standalone franchise. Easy. The DCEU had a Batman in Ben Affleck, and even though he swore up and down he wasn't leaving the role, he left almost immediately after Justice League came out. He's being replaced, but not by Robert Pattinson's Batman, but by Michael Keaton's original Batman from the Tim Burton movies.
I'm Batman.
Okay. But also, Ben Affleck isn't quite done with the Batman role, as he'll be seen in Zack Snyder's Justice League, which he may or may not shoot some new scenes for, even though that movie won't count for canon. Unless, of course, it's a massive success, and then we're really in trouble. Sure, I think I understand it all. But, who does Joaquin Phoenix's Joker fight? Oh, quick, Alfred, get me a bat aspirin, please. But man, that is complicated when I say it out loud. The DC universe has a lot going on right now, and I think from an outside perspective, it would be easy to call them messy. Ever since the MCU perfected the shared universe idea, every competitor has been trying their hardest to emulate it. And I think we can all agree that DC was just a little too quick out of the gate and stumbled hardcore. They weren't patient in their strategy and decided to announce their shared universe plans almost immediately, which was based around the idea that heroes like The Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, along with the established trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, would team up in a Justice League movie and then spin off in their own solo adventures. Kind of like the anti-Marvel method. And look, that was fine. I didn't envy the position DC found themselves in, because if they did it more like Marvel, they would have been criticized for copying their formula. But because of a string of critical failures, this just wasn't working, and surprisingly, DC found success in making movies that were more standalone in nature and only loosely connected. They thought all we wanted was to see our favorite heroes team up together, but in reality, we just wanted good stories that involve our favorite heroes. But there is a way for DC to have their cake and eat it too. We've entered into a phase where the multiverse is going to be an important concept for any shared universe, and by the looks of it, both the MCU and DC will be using this concept in the near future. Now, look, I'm not saying that one will be better than the other, but I am saying that DC is certainly in a more advantageous position to use the concept of the multiverse to unite not only their loosely connected recent movies, but also their huge stockpile of older DC titles. Not only can the multiverse keep everything as it is right now without major hoop jumping, but it can also lay the stage for the ultimate crossover, the likes of which have never been seen on screen before. So, okay, let's pretend that DC is fully committed to the idea of the multiverse. I mean, it certainly sounds like it. When news broke that Ezra Miller's slow-starting Flash movie would not only feature an appearance by Michael Keaton's Batman from the Tim Burton movies, but also set him up for a Nick Fury-like role in later movies, it became clear that DC is planning to visit multiple universes in the near future. And from a story perspective, that makes a lot of sense. After trying so hard to have one universe with shared continuity, some surprising things happened. The standalone Aquaman movie grossed over $1 billion, proving you don't necessarily need to put the character with others to be successful. And then, Joaquin Phoenix's brilliant standalone Joker took the world by storm and also grossed over $1 billion. It became pretty clear that you don't necessarily need just one version of a character as long as it's a good story. So the multiverse is definitely the best way to go for the DC universe. It would be a way to maintain all of these separate franchises and different versions of characters while still showing a small hint of connectivity that could lead to something exciting in the future. Let's run through a few examples and then we'll talk about the ultimate end goal. Okay, let's begin with Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is set to premiere next year and finally answer the question of what Henry Cavill's Superman looks like without a terrifying CGI upper lip. Okay, it's gonna have other cool stuff like Darkseid and hopefully more fleshed out characters, but that Superman mustache is the biggest question mark for me. The movie is in a really fascinating position because if it turns out to be the best thing in the history of superhero cinema, then that is a problem. It's not like we're gonna get a sequel to it, or Ben Affleck is magically gonna come back to the Batman role after it premieres. And what about the character of Darkseid? The movie was supposed to be the character's big introduction, and if he's a major success, what happens to the Darkseid that's probably going to factor into Ava DuVernay's New Gods movie? Well, with a multiverse, this isn't a huge problem anymore. You could just say that the Snyder universe takes place on a different Earth than the Earth that we're used to, and it wipes away almost any problems with continuity. By stating firmly that yes, the movie is part of the DC multiverse, the DCEU is opening itself up to have a series of different director's cuts out there that could be explained as existing in a different universe. And it wouldn't stop there. Remember how Suicide Squad was so disappointing? Well, its director, David Ayer, says that there is a better director's cut out there, and I think it deserves to be seen. Before, it made sense for Warner Brothers not to release it, as it could have been confusing to some people regarding how radically different it ultimately was. As well as if it's a truly better version than the Suicide Squad we got, Warner Brothers will look foolish for not sticking with the director's vision. But if they release it under the guise of the DC Multiverse and brand it as another possible way the story could have gone, then they'll at least save themselves a little face. And speaking of Suicide Squad, everyone's currently buzzing about James Gunn's upcoming movie, The Suicide Squad. The film is being described as a quasi-reboot with a handful of returning characters, but really we should all think of it as a do-over after the first movie failed to gain any traction. It's easier to think of the Suicide Squad as operating as just part of the multiverse rather than trying to figure out why the two movies look and feel like polar opposites. All of DC's movies have this potential, and it doesn't stop with the recent ones. DC has such a long history with movies, and now they could unite them all by saying they all take place in the multiverse. It'd be relatively easy to do, too. In the new Flash movie, it seems like Barry is gonna travel across universes to Michael Keaton's Tim Burton universe. But what if, along the way, he runs through a lot of different worlds and events? They don't have to be big things, but let's say he runs into Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin and hears a horrible ice pun.
All right, everyone, chill.
Before moving on to a world where a Christopher Reeves-looking Superman is fighting Zod from Superman 2. And then he hops through to another world where he sees Bane from The Dark Knight Rises blowing up a football stadium and threatening Gotham with a nuclear bomb. All of these small gestures and quick cameos would establish that DC's multiverse is one vast connected web. And sure, all these little nods are great, but let's not lose sight of what we all want. We want to see the most epic crossover in cinematic history that unites heroes and different versions of our favorite characters against an ultimate evil threat. We already saw a small-scale version of this on the CW with their awesome Crisis on Infinite Earths event, but now it's time to top that and go even bigger. Is it too much to ask for one day to see Grant Gustin's Barry Allen and Ezra Miller's Barry Allen team up again, but this time on the big screen? What about an epic moment where different versions of Batman played by Ben Affleck, Robert Pattinson, Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, and the voice of Will Arnett all share a scene while fighting different Jokers played by Jared Leto, Joaquin Phoenix, and even Jack Nicholson? Just imagine a scene where characters from every single DC movie or television show team up to save the entire multiverse. Is it a long shot? Totally, but with the DC multiverse established and thriving, that would be something to hope for in the future. The entire concept of the multiverse is going to be explored by both the MCU and DC in coming years, and it represents a true shift in superhero storytelling. Because of the success of the shared universe in the MCU, everyone was quick to try to emulate it and failed. But move aside, shared universes, because there's a new sheriff in town, and its name is the Multiverse. As both the MCU and DC explore and play with the concept of the multiverse in the coming years, you can expect DC to start having even more standalone adventures. But it's fascinating because although both instances of the multiverse are going to be great for the MCU and DCEU, I think the DCEU is in a much more interesting position. The MCU is a well-oiled machine at this point. They're gonna churn out hit movie after hit movie and keep releasing phases until 4056. But all of their movies are similar in look and tone because they have to be. But DC doesn't play by those rules. Although tone has been one of the consistent critiques for DC movies over the years, now the movies don't have to worry about it. Their movies can have a wide range of varying tones. For example, you can have the fun Shazam superhero origin story, and you can also have the disturbing Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie, and it ultimately doesn't matter. As long as the multiverse exists, these worlds can exist apart from each other. So, although I was quick to laugh at DC for having so many different projects with wildly different atmospheres, I think they're the ones laughing now. Because if you look at it, the MCU doesn't have as deep of a backlog to really explore the multiverse concept like DC does. DC can make announcements like Michael Keaton returning as Batman and have fans go into a major frenzy at the thought of an actor returning to a role almost 30 years later. But what's the best the MCU can do at this point? Sure, we know the MCU multiverse has the best chance of bringing in the X-Men and the mutants, and that's super awesome. But it's not like they're gonna get the same actors reprising their roles. Ultimately, this way, DC finds themselves in a totally unique position to finally capitalize on their long history of comic-based movies. Alright, that is a wrap on today's video. So what do you think? Do you think a multiverse is the right way to go for the DC universe? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more awesome CBR content like this. I heard there was a multiverse where you already hit that subscribe button, so you don't want this version of yourself to be left out, do you? What are you waiting for? Follow your clone's example!